Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive.
Definitely.
Awesome. Today we're going to be tackling something pretty complex.
Sounds good.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one. We're going to be looking at the world of regulations, risk, and compliance.
Okay.
Specifically how they all kind of intertwine in the business world.
Right.
And we're going to be basing this deep dive on an episode from the Compliance Officers Playbook podcast.
Okay.
Called How Regulations Impact Risk and Compliance.
Interesting.
And I think this will be a good one because, you might think regulations are just there to kind of,
Keep everyone in check.
yeah, just keep everybody in check.
Right.
But
There's more to it.
they can actually create risks too.
Interesting.
So let's unpack all of that.
Sounds good.
So maybe we should start with you giving us just a quick overview of what are regulations really
Yeah, that's a great place to start.
at their core?
Yeah, so at their core, regulations are basically rules.
Set by authorities, right? To govern how things work.
Uh-huh.
And I always like to think of them as like guardrails on a highway.
Okay.
They're intended to kind of keep you on the right path, prevent you from veering off course.
So they're like the rule book, basically, for the game of business.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can think of them that way.
Okay.
They aim to ensure, safety, maintain fair markets, protect consumers, all sorts of things like that.
Okay, but doesn't that, sometimes make things, way more complicated?
Absolutely.
Like, more rules sometimes equals more problems, or...
Yeah, and that's a really good point.
Okay.
While regulations can reduce certain risks
Okay.
by setting clear expectations and everything, sometimes their complexity can lead to new challenges.
Okay.
And a good example of this is the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, or SOX as it's commonly known,
Right.
which was put in place to strengthen corporate governance, after those big accounting scandals we had.
Right. But it also created a pretty significant administrative burden.
Ah, SOX. Yeah, I remember that from my business school days.
Yeah.
All about financial transparency and accountability.
Exactly.
It almost sounds like a classic case of the cure being worse than the disease.
In a way, yeah, you could say that. It
Oh.
shows that, regulations aren't a one-size-fits-all solution.
Right.
And they can have these, unintended consequences sometimes.
Okay, so it's not always a perfect fix.
No, not at all.
Okay.
And that actually brings up another interesting point,
Okay.
which is that regulations are constantly evolving. They're not static.
Okay.
Just look at cybersecurity regulations, right?
Right.
They're constantly changing to try to keep pace with new technologies and threats.
So companies can't just set it and forget it
No, definitely not.
when it comes to compliance.
No, they need to be adaptable.
They're almost trying to hit a moving target.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great way to put it. And that's actually where the relationship between risk and compliance
Okay.
gets really interesting, right?
Okay.
They're not two separate things,
Okay.
but, two sides of the same coin constantly influencing each other
Uh-huh.
with regulations as the driving force behind it all.
So it's this constant dance
Yeah, you could say that.
between risk and compliance.
Yeah.
Okay.
And regulations are the music.
Gotcha. Okay, so I'm starting to see now how intertwined it all is.
Yeah.
But can you give me an example of how this this dance between risk and compliance actually plays out in the real world?
Yeah.
A concrete example.
Sure. So let's take financial regulations as an example.
Okay.
Like the Basel III framework, which requires banks to, assess and report on various risks like credit risk, market risk, operational risk, all those fun things.
Yeah, all the scary stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
But by complying with these regulations, institutions are essentially conducting very comprehensive risk assessments
Okay.
that they might not have otherwise undertaken
Okay.
if they weren't required to.
So it's almost like regulations are forcing companies to look in the mirror
Yeah.
and address potential weaknesses
Yeah, you could say that.
they might have otherwise just totally overlooked.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And what's even more interesting
Okay.
is that compliance programs,
Okay.
when they're done right,
Uh-huh.
can actually become powerful risk management tools
Interesting.
in themselves.
Okay, so it's not just about blindly following the rules. It's about using them as a framework for building a more resilient business.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it.
Okay, I like that.
And a good example of this is,
Oh.
the practice of regularly updating compliance protocols
Okay.
in response to changes in labor laws.
Okay.
So this not only helps companies avoid penalties,
Uh-huh.
but it also protects their reputation
Right.
and creates like a better working environment for employees.
So there are these like positive ripple effects
Yeah.
from doing compliance the right way.
Exactly.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, it's not just about avoiding the negative consequences, right?
Right.
It's about actually achieving some positive outcomes as well
Okay.
through compliance.
Okay, that's
Mm,
cool.
yeah.
So we've talked kind of about the overall concept, but can we look at some real world like examples of regulations
Yeah, let's do that.
that businesses have to like grapple with on a daily basis?
Absolutely.
So give me some of those examples.
Yeah, so one that's had a major impact, I think, on how businesses handle data is the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR.
GDPR.
You've probably heard of it.
Yeah, I remember when that came into effect. It
Yeah.
was like a pretty big deal.
It was big news. Yeah.
Yeah, so for people who don't know, what is that? What are some of the things that it covers?
So it basically gives individuals more control over their personal data. And it requires companies to implement all these like robust data protection measures.
So like what kind of things are we talking about?
So things like encrypting data,
Oh,
having like clear breach notification procedures,
okay.
implementing like strict access controls.
Gotcha.
So essentially they need to do everything they can to minimize the risk of data breaches,
Right.
which can be super damaging both financially and to their reputation.
And the penalties for not complying are like pretty hefty, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
What are they?
You're talking fines that can reach into the tens of millions of euros for like serious violations.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's not something to take lightly.
Yeah, no kidding.
But it's not even just about the financial hit, right? There's the potential for like long-term reputational damage,
Right.
which can be even harder to recover from.
Yeah, once you get a bad name out there for not protecting data, it's
Exactly.
hard to shake that.
Yeah. People are going to think twice about doing business with you, right?
Right, exactly.
If they don't think you're, taking care of their information.
So GDPR is a good example of a regulation with some real teeth.
Definitely.
What other regulations are out there that are kind of shaping the business landscape these days?
Yeah. So another one that's critical, particularly for financial institutions,
Okay.
is anti-money laundering regulations.
Oh, AML?
Or AML for short.
Okay. I've got to admit, this one's always kind of sounded a little like shadowy to me.
Yeah.
Like something you only see in like spy movies, you
Yeah.
know?
Mm.
But how does it actually like play out in the real world?
So essentially, AML regulations require financial institutions to have all these systems in place
Okay.
to detect and prevent money laundering activities.
Oh, okay.
So they have to be able to identify suspicious transactions, monitor customer activity, and know your customer procedures.
Right.
Those KYC checks you do when you open a bank account or something.
Right.
So it's all about really knowing who you're doing business with and where the money's coming from.
So it's about forcing financial institutions to be much more diligent
Exactly.
about who they're working with.
Yeah, and the consequences for failing to comply, again, they're significant.
Like what kind of...
So we're talking huge fines, potential criminal charges,
Oh, wow.
and even the loss of their operating license in some cases.
So
Yeah.
definitely not something you want to mess around with.
No, definitely not.
Okay. Any others?
Let's talk about environmental regulations,
Okay.
which are like increasingly important these days
Okay.
for businesses
Right.
across a wide range of industries. So things like, the Clean Air Act,
Right.
or the regulations set by the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency.
Yeah. So those are all about protecting the environment, right?
Yeah.
But how does that like translate into like regulations for businesses?
Yeah. So for companies that operate in industries with like a significant environmental footprint,
Okay.
complying with these regulations can mean investing in, expensive pollution control equipment,
Right.
adhering to like strict emission standards, or even like totally overhauling their production processes.
So it can be pretty big undertaking
It can be, yeah.
for some companies.
But more and more companies are recognizing
Okay.
that there are benefits to this too.
Okay.
So reducing their environmental impact can actually improve their brand image.
Okay, so it's not just about avoiding the fines.
Right.
It's also about
It's about, like, taking responsibility for the long-term sustainability of their operations.
It's almost like turning what could be seen as a burden into a positive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
And it can attract, environmentally conscious customers, even give them a competitive edge in the market.
Right. Right.
So there are a lot of potential upsides as well.
Okay, so there's a business case to be made
Yep.
for...
For being green.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And then there's another important one,
Okay.
which is the Occupational Safety and Health Act, or OSHA,
OSHA. Okay.
Yeah. better known as OSHA.
So they're the ones that make sure we don't end up working in like dangerous factories
But-
or like on unsafe construction sites.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
They cover a wide range of, like, workplace safety issues.
Right.
So everything from ventilation and machine guarding to, like, providing protective equipment and training programs.
So the focus is really on like preventing accidents
Right.
that could lead to like injuries or even fatalities.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
And for companies, non-compliance can be really costly,
Okay.
not just in terms of fines and potential lawsuits, but also, like, increased insurance premiums.
Yeah.
And even criminal charges in some cases.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's really important.
It's a good reminder that these regulations aren't just like abstract rules.
Right.
They have like real world consequences.
Yeah, they do.
And sometimes it's like literally a matter of life or death.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And that actually brings us to the crucial role that compliance officers play
Okay.
in all of this.
Let's talk about those folks
Yeah.
who are on the front lines of like keeping businesses in line.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what does a compliance officer actually do all day?
Well, it's a pretty demanding job, that's for sure.
Sounds like it.
Compliance officers, they have to be incredibly knowledgeable,
Okay.
very detail-oriented, and have a real knack for staying up to date
Okay.
on the constantly shifting world of regulations.
So they need to be part detective, part lawyer,
Yeah,
part fortune teller.
a little bit of everything.
Right. Okay, so what are some of their core like responsibilities?
Well, one of the most crucial ones is staying ahead of the curve on regulatory changes.
Okay.
So that means constantly monitoring new legislation,
Okay.
industry trends,
Mm-hmm.
any changes in how regulations are being enforced.
So it's not just about knowing the rules like today.
Right.
It's also about trying to predict what the rules might be tomorrow.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a very dynamic field.
Okay.
And a good compliance officer is always thinking a few steps ahead.
Okay.
Another key aspect is conducting thorough risk assessments.
Okay. So tell me about that.
So they need to be able to identify potential areas of vulnerability within the organization,
Okay.
and then evaluate, how likely those risks are to occur and what the impact would be if they did.
So they need a deep understanding of like how all the different parts of a business work together.
Absolutely. Yeah, they need to see the big picture,
Ugh.
understand how all the different departments are interconnected,
Mm-hmm.
and anticipate how those operations might be affected by, regulatory changes or external threats.
Okay, so they've identified like the risks,
Right.
what happens next.
Well, that's where they really get to put their expertise to work.
Yeah.
They're responsible for developing and implementing, comprehensive compliance programs
Okay.
that mitigate those risks and ensure the company's operating within the law.
So they're like building a safety net to make sure the company doesn't fall through the cracks.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
Okay.
A strong compliance program is going to have, like, clear policies and procedures,
Okay.
thorough training for employees,
Right.
regular audits and monitoring activities,
Right.
and a clear process for reporting and addressing any compliance violations.
So it sounds like a massive undertaking.
It can be.
Is there anything else that's like essential for a compliance officer to be successful?
Well, one thing that's often overlooked is their ability to collaborate effectively with other departments.
Yeah.
Compliance isn't something that happens in a vacuum.
Right.
It touches every part of the business.
So it's not just the compliance officer's responsibility, really.
Exactly.
Everyone in the company plays a role
Yeah.
in making sure things are done, ethically and in compliance with the rules.
Exactly. And that's why, communication and collaboration are so important.
Okay.
Compliance officers need to work closely with, like, legal, IT, HR, finance, really every department,
Right.
to make sure everyone's on the same page and working together
Okay.
to mitigate risk and protect the company's reputation.
Awesome. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
So maybe just to kind of wrap things up, what are some of the key takeaways you'd want our listeners to remember about this whole world of regulations, risk, and compliance?
Well, I think the biggest one is that, even though regulations can sometimes feel like a burden,
Yeah.
they're really essential
Okay.
for responsible business operations.
It's a good reminder that the rules are there for a reason.
Exactly.
They
Yeah.
protect consumers, they protect employees,
Yeah.
they create a more stable and sustainable business environment for
Exactly.
everybody.
Yeah. And I think another key takeaway is that, this whole relationship between regulations, risk, and compliance, it's constantly evolving.
Okay.
So regulations shape the risk landscape.
Huh.
Effective compliance programs help to mitigate those risks.
Right.
And so you get this positive cycle
Yeah.
that benefits both businesses and society as a whole.
So it's not just about avoiding penalties.
Yeah.
It's about building like a culture of compliance
Exactly.
that becomes part of a company's DNA.
Well said. Yeah, it's about doing business the right way,
I love that.
even when no one's looking.
Awesome. Well, hey, on that note, I think we should wrap it up here.
Sounds good.
So thanks to everyone for joining us for this deep dive
Yeah, thanks for having me.
into the world of regulations, risk, and compliance.
It's been fun.
We hope you found it insightful.
Definitely.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep asking those tough questions.
Absolutely.